I'm sure you've got an absolutely superb packed programme ahead of you, so I'm only going to speak for just a couple of seconds, really. But you've got fascinating lectures and, of course, first-class speakers, and I'm sure you will all have a wonderful time. I also hope that you'll spend a little time looking at the history and the paintings and the artifacts which are dotted around this building, giving the history of surgery in England. And I know that you will have time later on to visit the world-famous and now award-winning Hunterian Museum. I understand some tours are planned for that. In many ways, the history of surgery in England is embodied in this very building. And if I just for one moment may ask you to turn your mind back to 1535, then surgery in England was actually undertaken by three very disparate groups. There were the military, who were mainly operating, of course, on the field of battle. There were the monks, who limited their trade to the monasteries, of course. And then there were a third and slightly unusual group, who were the barbers, who tended mainly to operate, certainly in the main cities, around the city jails, because they used to practice their trade on the executed prisoners so that they could do fresh dissection, etc. So in 1540, King Henry VIII managed to be persuaded that we needed to get some order to surgery in this country. And at that time, a charter was drawn up which brought together the Company of Barbers with the Guild of Surgeons. And if you haven't already seen it, I would draw your attention to this very famous painting by Holbein, which is hanging in the Edward Lumley Hall at the end of this corridor. And this was painted just shortly before Holbein's death. And it depicts Henry VIII issuing the Royal Charter to Thomas Vicary, who was the first Grand Master of Surgery in the Company of Barber Surgeons. We still celebrate that event by having an annual Vicary lecture and a dinner in that honour. This union lasted for about 200 years, but then in 1796, again, an Act of Parliament was passed separating, at the request of the surgeons, what was then the Company of Surgeons away from the barbers. And as a consequence at that time, they bought this site. Now, originally it was very small, and within 20 years, it was realized that it was nowhere near big enough. And this was accentuated by the fact that also at that time, the government purchased the museum collection of the late John Hunter and, often forgotten, his brother William. And together, the government agreed to fund a rebuild on this site, accommodating now the Hunterian Museum. That collection grew dramatically in the years that followed and extended to 23,000 specimens, mainly augmented by the voyage of the Beagle and Charles Darwin bringing many of those specimens back to this country. All remained well until the terrible night of the 10th and 11th of May 1941. And in World War II, this building took a direct hit from a bomb which virtually destroyed a very large portion of the building, all but, in fact, the entrance portico. And although many of the specimens had been moved out of London prior to the start of war, mainly the art collections, many of the smaller specimens were housed in what was supposed to be a bomb-proof tunnel in the basement. Unfortunately, that tunnel acted like a furnace, and many, in fact, a third of the collection was lost. But you'll be hearing more about the Hunterian Museum and the Hunterian collection later on. If you actually take the Hunterian Museum, the odontological collection, and also the Wellcome Museum of Pathology, which I'm afraid we cannot get access to today, then together you will find that only about 10% of the entire collection is on display at any one time. But that will be explained to you later on. Ladies and gentlemen, enough of me. I welcome you all. Thank you for coming to the Royal College of Surgeons in England, and I hope you have a very pleasant day.